Okay.
Very good afternoon, respected senior doctors and dear friends. On behalf of Ahmedabad Family Physician Association, I welcome you all on Facebook Live CME webinar today. Hope all of you are in good health. Today's topic of webinar is cardiac surgery and the role of family physician. As all of you know that yesterday was the World Heart Day. The cardiovascular disease is the number one cause of death on the planet, and the people with CVD with its risk factor are more vulnerable to severe form of coronavirus. Today with me on Zoom meeting, eminent gold medalist cardiac surgeon Dr. Manmohan Singh Chauhan from SCG Hospital, and as a moderator Dr. Ramesh I. Patel, Joint Secretary AFPA. Now I request Dr. R.I. Patel to give brief introduction of Dr. Manmohan Singh Chauhan. Dr. R.I. Patel.
Thank you, Dr. Dhiren Chanandia, for inviting me. Dear friends, good evening, and I welcome you all on this occasion. And also I welcome Dr. Manmohan Singh on behalf of Ahmedabad Family Physician Association for today. Friends, today's topic of CME is cardiac surgery and a role of family physician. Before we start the lecture, I will give brief introduction of Dr. Manmohan Singh Chauhan. As you know all, that he is a well-known and skilled cardiothoracic and vascular surgeon in our city and state. He had done his MCH in cardiothoracic and vascular surgery from Dr. Ram Manohar Lohia Hospital, GG University, New Delhi in 2013, scoring highest first rank in India and achieved gold medal in MCH. He had experience of more than 2,000 cardiothoracic and vascular surgeries. He is more interested in total area arterial CABG and minimum invasive cardiac surgery. He had published so many research papers in various journals in India and international also. At present, he is a consultant cardiothoracic and vascular surgeon in SCG Hospital. Now I request Dr. Manmohan Singh to deliver the talk on cardiac surgery and role of family physician. Sir, 1 minute, please. Sir, we are proud of you to be here with us at this gesture, in spite of your busy schedule. As such, you know that we family physicians do not have time to read the books and journals in this busy OPD schedule and visits. So by attending such type of CMN conference, we get refreshed our knowledge and can explain to our patient in our language. So nice of you. Thank you, sir. Let's start the topic. Over to you, sir.
Sure. That was a great introduction by Dr. Ramesh Patel, and thank you so much. So today, what I'm going to discuss with you all is the role of cardiac surgery and the role of family physicians in post-surgery patients, and your very important role in referring patients to surgeons or cardiologists also. So to begin with, I just want to brief everyone with the anatomy of the heart, and what we can see here that the SVC and the IVC, they are here, they drain into the right atrium, and through the tricuspid valve, the blood goes into the right ventricle. Through the right ventricle, the blood goes to the pulmonary artery, and through the pulmonary artery, it goes to the lungs, it gets oxygenated, it comes back through the pulmonary veins into the left atrium, and through the left atrium, it goes into the LV through the mitral valve, and then finally through the aorta, it is supplied to the rest of the body, the carotids and all, and the kidneys and all other stuff. So we all know about major these structures in the heart, and we also know about the coronaries, that there are two major set of coronaries in the heart, and one is supplying the right side of the heart, that is the right coronary artery, and the other is the left coronary artery that gets divided into two, the left anterior descending artery and the left circumflex artery. So left anterior descending artery, that is called the LAD, is the most important coronary of the heart because it has got a huge supply, provides a huge supply to the myocardium. It supplies the septum also. So if the LAD gets blocked, or if a patient suffers a heart attack because of blockage in the LAD, then the heart function can go down to 30% from right straight from 60%. So LED is a very precious vessel, and in whatever way we are planning intervention on the LED, we always want to make sure that that particular intervention should stay, that anastomosis or that stent should stay patent for a longer period of time, a very long period of time, or maybe the lifetime of the patient, because that is the most important artery. So that is the reason why if the LED is involved in any of the patients, it is usually that is surgery that is actually advised, because in surgery we are putting arterial graft on the LED, and if we put an arterial graft on the LED, that arterial graft has a patency rate of nearly 95% in after 10 years also. So that is a very good patency rate, and that is better than any of the stents in the world that is available right now. And if we go with stents in the LED position, usually what happens is that you never know when the stent gets blocked. But the day the stent gets blocked, the patient suffers a heart attack. And that day, his heart function from 60%, it is going to drop down to 30%. And that is not going to be a very favorable situation if that patient goes for surgery at that time, when it drops down to 20-25%. So for a patient who has a blockage in LAD, the left anterior descending artery, it is always a recommended choice to go for surgery and give that patient a left internal mammary artery and arterial graft, so that we can increase the life expectancy of that patient to near normal, absolutely near normal. We have many examples also with us. I was working with Fortis Escorts Heart Institute, Delhi, and uh, way back in 2005, Mrs. Sushma Swaraj and Mr. Arun Jaitley, they were operated there by Dr. Naresh Trehan. Both of them, they underwent CABG, bypass surgery, and it is very heartening for me uh, to say that both of them, they died in 2019 because of renal failure and rather than heart problems. So back in 2005 they underwent surgery, and 14 years later also their heart was functioning absolutely fine, and that is all because of surgery. And there are so I believe graft surgery for the LED position is the most favorable uh, uh, treatment that we can give to the patients. So usually, what are the complaints that the patients come to you or us also? They are like the patient come with chest pain or some sort of upper abdominal discomfort. They may complain of some symptoms like gas and all. So my approach usually is, and what I suggest is, if a patient comes to you with chest pain or even an upper abdominal discomfort, and that patient is more than 40 years of age, then you should always have a suspicion of an underlying cardiac issue. Always get an ECG done. At the time of pain abdomen or chest pain, always get an ECG done. There are many times that we just leave these patients with pantoprazole or some sort of painkillers, thinking that it must be some sort of gastritis. Though just a simple ECG could have been of real help in diagnosing myocardial infarction evolving in mind. And some patients, and most of the patients, they usually complain of angina on exertion. They walk for 100 meters, 200 meters, then they have to stop and take some rest, and then again they're able to walk. So this is something a very very a situation in which the patient is not able to perform his daily activities with ease. So our aim of performing surgery is also to get the patient rid of all these things. so that he can perform his normal life activities just like before. So initially, after surgeries, after the surgery he may have some limitations in doing his activities. Like for 6 weeks, we may advise him not to lift weights of more than 5 kg. But then, as the time advances, these patients do well. They come for follow-ups, and you just cannot even tell unless you look at the scar on the patient's chest, and you cannot even guess that this patient has undergone a surgery or not, because they're just doing so well. They're doing everything. So, and there are some different scenarios also, like females in our setup. They do not complain of angina. They do not complain of chest pain. They complain of some breathing difficulty, some dyspnea, or ghabrat like symptoms. So we have to be very particular in assessing patients, females especially, who are more than 40 years of age, because after menopause, these patients, because of hormone withdrawal, the the protective effects of the hormones, it ceases to happen, and uh, these patients are at equal risk of developing coronary artery disease as as their male counterparts. So, what are the risk factors that are leading to cardiac problems? First of all, it's diabetes. India is the diabetic capital of the world, and our food habits, like high carbohydrate diet, morning parathas, and all, aloo, uh, potato, and then high sugar diet, lots of tea over the day. So all these things are really bad, and they contribute a lot to poorly controlled diabetes. And poorly controlled diabetics, they have very bad vessels. They have very bad coronaries, and that makes the surgical procedure even more complex. Then another thing is hypertension. Hypertension, in a way, it contributes to the LV remodeling, because hypertension is something, it's like an obstruction, a distal obstruction against which a heart has to work. So if the blood pressure is low, heart can easily relax, and it can pump easily. But if the blood pressure is kept high, then the heart has to work against a certain gradient, and the myocardial oxygen demand is going to be high, and it brings about the changes in the LV structure also. Then, as we know that these days the lifestyle is so stressful, young chaps working in multinational companies, they face so much of problems, stress, because of chasing targets and stuff. So they have a very stressful lifestyle, and because of all this, they indulge in activities like smoking, chewing tobacco, just to keep themselves relaxed. And smoking, as we all know, it is a major contributor in coronary artery disease. And obesity is one of the factors. Uh, Flawed dietary habits like eating samosas, fried items, fast food. In this fast-paced life, everybody wants food very fast. So fast food is the craze of this time. And because of so much of workload, uh, these young people, they hardly find any time for exercise also. Hypertriglyceridemia, and a very important thing is family history. Family history is so important that I would say that if a patient, or if a person has a history of has a family history of heart disease, like if his mother or father has a heart disease, if any one of them has a heart disease, then there are around 20% chances that he is also going to have a heart disease in his lifetime. And if both of them have got heart disease, then the risk, and then the chances go up to 40%. So family history is very important. We have to know our genes very well, because if we know that the thing that this coronary cardiac problem is running in our family, then there are very high chances that we can stop the progression very early in life by getting ourselves detected, by getting ourselves checked. So in people who have got a positive family history, I would suggest that they should undergo uh, proper evaluation from the age of 30 years of age. at least, so that we can catch them early. So this is a flow diagram about how the referral system usually happens. So if there's an onset of a disease, like there are symptoms, and it is diagnosed by a primary care physician, so there are certain options that you can choose with. Either if he thinks that he is capable of managing that patient right there, then he gives the patient a proposed medical treatment. Now that patient can be referred by the physician to a cardiologist, or that patient can also be referred by the physician to a cardiac surgeon. Both the cardiac surgeon and the cardiologist are equally competent to deal with such a situation by doing interventions. Or even if you send such a patient to a cardiac surgeon, he can take a judicial decision that if the patient needs a TMT, a stress echo, and whatever evaluation tools that are required, and he can propose the cardiologist to do a coronary angio also. So these are the ways, and if whatever is best for the patient, that is done, be it stenting or CABG. So what are the purpose? What is the purpose of CABG? CABG, it restores blood flow to the heart. It relieves chest pain and ischemia. It improves patient's quality of life, and it enables the patient to resume a normal life cycle. It also lowers the risk of heart attack. And these are the major factors that I would say that CABG really helps in uh, lower risk of subsequent heart attacks, and quality of life improves to a dramatic extent, and there's hardly any chest pain or ischemia apart from some musculoskeletal pain that initially patients they complain, but that is just initial. There may be a dull aching pain for a period of 6 months or so, but that hardly affects the normal functioning or activity. So the indications for CABG would be like left main disease or an equivalent. Equivalent, I would say that if the lesion in LAD is very proximal, it is very proximal, and there is also a lesion in the circumflex, so it is a left main equivalent, and that requires CABG. Stenting in such cases is very risky. Uh, a stent in the LAD, in a proximal LAD, can also block the circumflex, and the patient can land up in trouble during a coronary angioplasty. So in these patients, I think it is very safe to refer the patient to a surgeon for surgery. And then triple vessel disease, it is already well known that triple vessel disease requires surgery. Triple vessel disease, or I would go up to that extent in saying that a lesion of more than 70% in LAD, even if it is a single lesion in the heart, just the LAD is affected and it is more than 70% affected, I wouldn't suggest putting in a stent in that patient, because putting in a Lima, left internal memory artery graft, to that LAD would give him a really good option, and we can do it these days through a thoracotomy approach also. We need not cut the chest bone for that. We can go through a lateral thoracotomy, through a left thoracotomy, and harvest the left internal memory artery, and we can graft the LAD through that also. And the patient's recovery is fabulous. Even with the sternotomy at SCG hospital, we are discharging patient on 4th day after surgery. So we have tried to expedite things, and all of this has happened because of good anesthesia, good instruments, on all these things. And through a thoracotomy, we can reduce this time to just 2 days or 3 days also. So even if just the LAD is blocked, I think, I have a firm belief that the patient should undergo surgery. And triple vessel disease it is documented world over that triple vessel disease should be given the first choice as surgery. And triple vessel disease with in a diabetic patient, all the more it becomes more necessary that surgery should happen rather than stents, because in diabetics the patency of stents decreases a lot. And once the stents they get blocked, a normal LV can drop down to 30% also. And abnormal ventricular function in patients whom stenting has failed, and if there are life-threatening arrhythmias that are happening, and then there are other situations also. So, and I have not written it here, but in chronic kidney disease, in patients in whom where we wish to avoid heavy contrast use during angioplasty, in them we can always advise CVT as the first option. So diabetics, chronic kidney disease, left main, triple vessel disease, or ostial LAD, even any kind of LAD lesion, is surgery should be the best option for that patient. As part of workup and evaluation, when a patient comes to us, we do an ECG. If the patient has complaints like angina and exertion, and we find most of the times we'll find that there are no issues with ECG. ECG actually looks normal unless and until patient has suffered some heart attack in previous days. So if the heart attack has happened, then you will find some Q waves in the representing leads. Like if there are Q waves in 2, 3 and AVF, then it means the patient has suffered an inferior wall MI, and you can just guess, but just by looking at the ECG, that what the LV function of this patient can be. If there are Q waves just in 2, 3 and AVF, and the rest of the leads are perfectly normal, then you can easily think that the heart function would be around 40 to 45%. But if similarly, if the Q waves are there in all the anterior leads, V1, V2, V3, V4, V5, and if an echocardiographer says that his LV function, sir, it looks to me like 50%, I won't believe them. I would say that how come there are so many Q waves, such deep Q waves in anterior leads, and you're saying it's 50%, 40%. I don't trust them. I would still get that echo revised, and usually most of the times I have found the LV function to be around 20-25%, because interior wall MI gives a major setback to the LV function. So that is how we assess the patient, just by looking through the ECG. Just by looking at the ECG, we can guess so many things. We can correlate ECG with echo. So because echo is something like it's just like an ultrasound. So one person can have one finding, the other person can have another finding. So it is very, very observer variant. Then so we can go for TMT. If the ECG is absolutely normal, but the patient says he has angina, the next thing we do is TMT. In TMT, we find that after reaching a particular heart rate of like 140, 150, the patient may show some ST elevation or ST depression in on some particular leads, and that can lead us to the next investigation, that is coronary angiography. We can do a stress echo also. Stress echo, in stress echo, we look for hypokinesia that is developed after on stress. So many times what happens, if a patient has blockage in his coronaries, blocked coronaries, he may have a normal LV function like 60%. But if you do a stress echo and give his heart some stress, because of ischemia, of that transient ischemia, his heart function would drop down to 40-45%. So this can be, stress echo can be done by making the patient run on TMT, on treadmill, or you can give a dobutamine also. So by dobutamine infusion, you can increase his heart rate. So that's how stress echo is done. Then we go for coronary angiogram. That is the conventional approach that can be done by radial artery or femoral artery. And CT coronary angio is one of the very upcoming modality, less invasive than coronary angio. We can think of doing a CT coronary angio in patients who have a deranged lipid profile, who have bad dietary habits, who are obese, and who you think that coronary angiogram would be like something invasive, or you can can refer them to a radiologist who is competent in doing a cardiac CT, a coronary CT. The only limiting factor is that they require a heart rate of around 70 to perform this CT coronary. So by CT coronary also you can stratify a lot of patients, that if this patient requires a coronary angio or not. Then routine blood investigation, we do lipid profile, we do a carotid Doppler, we do peripheral Doppler, because it is the disease process. It is a similar disease process that is there in the coronary, so it can happen anywhere else also. It can happen in the carotids or in any other blood vessels, in the femoral arteries, anywhere, because it is a atherosclerotic disease. And these days in a hospital, we are following the protocol of getting a HRCT chest and a RT-PCR for COVID in every patient. We are doing both these tests together so that we can correlate the reports with each other. What happens many times that HRCT chest shows changes of COVID, but RT-PCR comes negative. But even in that scenario, we send the patient home and wait for the CT changes to get resolved. And many times it happens that RT-PCR is positive, but HRCT chest is negative. Even in that scenario, we send the patient home and wait for the symptoms to resolve. So because it is these days we are encountering many such patients, COVID, and we also perform many times pulmonary function tests in patients who are heavy smokers, COPD, because we are going to open the chest, and once the chest is open, the respiratory physiology dynamics, they don't stay the same for a certain period of time, for 1 or 2 or 3 days. So pulmonary function test is very important to assess if the patient will come out of ventilator safely or not, and how he is going to perform the post-operative physiotherapy. Assessment of risk factors and evaluation of troubled systems by designated faculties. After the blood reports are with us, we have a close look at them, and blood sugar, if it is high, we suggest for control, we put the patient on human insulin, and if the serum creatinine is high or if blood urea is high, then we suspect many times what happens is these patients have recently undergone coronary angiography, and because of dye-related nephropathy, the serum creatinine can be raised for some time. So we always take a nephrology opinion, and assess the risk of post-operative dialysis or post-operative renal shutdown. Risk stratification on account of LV function, coronary status, and valve problems, old age, or comorbidities. So if the LV function is low, it is like 20-25%, and I have to do a CABG in a patient, I would explain him a risk of around 5 to 6%. 5 to 6% risk means if I'm going to operate such patients, 100 such patients, then 95 patients are going to go home safely, but 5 patients may have some issues with them. This is for 20-25% a year. So if the heart function is around 60%, it is normal. I explain the risk of around 1 to 2%. That means just 1 or 2 patients out of 100 patients are going to face problems. So that is a very healthy risk assessment, I guess, because I don't think so that there is any surgery in this world that is happening without risk. So risk explanation is very important. Patient counseling, pre-op optimization is very important. We have to tell them that what we are going to do with them, what kind of surgery we are going to do, what incision, what they are expected to do in post-op period, so as to relieve anxiety and fear of the procedure. And we have to tell them that what are the benefits of the surgery, how the surgery is going to benefit them afterwards. The risks are definitely higher in patients who have diabetes, kidney disease, lung disease, or peripheral arterial disease. Diabetes, in the sense, if there's heavily uncontrolled diabetes, like HbA1c is around Ideally, we prefer operating on patients who have HbA1c less than 8. But since I've come to Ahmedabad, I usually find diabetics who are very poorly controlled. HbA1c of around 11.5, 12, but still they are having chest pain. They have things like unstable angina. They complain of on and off chest pain, and the lesions are so tight that we cannot wait for the diabetes to control. We cannot send the patient home. We cannot say that you go home. So with a LED lesion of 95%. I won't suggest him to go home from the hospital and control his diabetes and come back to me. So we have to operate on these patients. We have to control their diabetes in pre-op period. We have to control their diabetes, their blood sugar in during OT and in post-operative stay also. And we have to make sure that our surgical technique is so smooth and it is so good that these patients do not develop any infections related to sternum or related to skin. Lung disease also similar, COPD I told you, and peripheral arterial disease. We assess all these things because in post-op, one in 1,000 patients you can have an ischemic limb after surgery. So this is how CABG looks like. So this is the arterial graft. This is left internal mammary artery. This is subclavian artery. So left internal mammary artery is the branch of subclavian artery, and this has been anastomosed to the LAD. So see LAD, these are all the septals. These are all septals. It's a beautiful graft, and these are vein grafts. So vein grafts, he has put the vein graft to one of the OMs, or this looks like a diagonal, and this is a vein graft to the right coronary artery. So there are times, so this is a very conventional approach of doing surgery. Lima to LAD and vein grafts you must have encountered in your practice at such patients who have undergone surgery with Lima, LAD and vein to other vessels. These days we have started doing total arterial grafting also, according to the patients. If that patient is really fit for that surgery, if the coronaries are good enough for total arterial grafting. In total arterial grafting, we use both mammaries, the left internal mammary artery and the right internal mammary artery. We make a Y out of the left internal mammary artery and the right internal mammary artery, and we create a meshwork. And with just those two grafts, we are anastomosing nearly 3 or 4 vessels out of them. So Lima goes to LAD, and the length and the right internal mammary artery Lima, it goes to OM, it goes to PD also. So we can graft 3 or 4 vessels without taking any vein from the leg or without even taking the radial artery from the hand. So you won't have any other incision apart from the chest incision. That's all. That is the advantage of bilateral mammary artery grafting, Lima surgery. So in post-op follow-up, what you very important. Your role is very, very important. The family physicians, because these patients come from far-flung places, and it is very difficult for them to consult us or to come to us for every problem. So they usually visit you, and they are very close to you. They admire you a lot, and they have lots of trust on you, and that is a very important thing. So full recovery from CABG, it may take up to 4 to 6 weeks, and physical activity actually varies from person to person. Most people can resume sexual activity in about 4 weeks, and driving in about 3 to 8 weeks. Patients should avoid lifting objects more than 5 kg weight for at least 6 weeks. Returning to work after 6 weeks is common unless your job involves specific and demanding physical activity. Some people may need to find less physically demanding type of work or work a reduced schedule for initial few weeks. we call the patient for the first follow-up after surgery after 7 days. After those 7 days, we do stitch removal of mostly the mediastinal drain and the left intercostal drain. Otherwise, our stitches in the center of the sternotomy stitches, they are called dissolved. They 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 don't require removal. The second follow-up is after 3 months, and subsequent follow-ups are done after every 6 months. In follow-ups, usually we do an ECG, echo, an X-ray chest, blood investigations, routine blood investigation with lipid profile, blood sugar, and HbA1c if the patient is diabetic. So echo is not every time important, because if the patient is not complaining of any breathlessness, any complaints of dyspnea on exertion, or any sort of chest pain, we don't think that every time we should be going for a echo. And ECG is okay, but even an ECG is not required many times. Even follow if the patient is not complaining anything, he's doing all sort of activity and everything is hale and hearty, we need not do all these things. And in blood investigations, what I would suggest, if the patient is on ACE inhibitors or ARBs, it is important to check for his serum creatinine renal function test every 6 months, because these patients are usually on telmisartan or ramipril in post-op to decrease the afterload, to relax the heart. So that's why serum creatinine renal function test is important every 6 months, and a lipid profile is important so that we can keep a check on their cholesterol levels. It is important, and see if they are following a proper diet or not. Blood sugar, same way, it has got a long-lasting effect on the results of the surgery. If we can control the blood sugar of these patients properly in post-op period, I can assure you that the results of the surgery are going to be 15 years, 20 years altogether. There won't be any trouble to the patient. Usual complaints that are encountered in follow-up. Many patients, they give a vague feeling of heaviness over left chest. So it is actually not angina. It is usually musculoskeletal. So if it is just a musculoskeletal pain, then simple painkiller or a Volane gel. Many times we advise नारियल का तेल, हम लोग बोलते हैं लगाने के लिए, तो patients can use that also. नारियल का तेल जो आप लोग लगाते हैं, so that can be used. That is just a musculoskeletal pain most of the times, and it can be treated symptomatically. If the patient complains of angina like pain, then that requires evaluation. That requires evaluation in the form of TMT or stress echo or a CT coronary graft status. If the patient comes to us with breathlessness, pedal edema after CABG, patients with poor LV function, they may come back with features of heart failure, because probably they must have consumed excessive amount of fluid. What we advise in post-op to poor LV patients is to restrict the fluid intake to less than 1.5 liters in 24 hours, and that fluid includes everything: water, tea, juice, any kind of fluid. That should be limited to less than 1.5 liters. And if in summers, probably you can go up to 2 liters, but most of the time these patients take up intake, their fluid intake is so high, they land up in failure, and they come to us, or we have to look for further myocardial dysfunction also. So in these patients, we have to do an X-ray chest, an echo, a routine blood investigation should be done, and these patients may require diuretics and afterload reducing agents. The patients can also come with complaints of some discharge from sternotomy wound. So we have to see if the patient is complaining of fever along with it or not. So and that discharge can be clear, it can be purulent, or it can be just blood, frank blood. So if it is purulent and the patient is also running fever, then we need to get a CBC done. CBC, we see the counts, we send the purulent stuff for culture and sensitivity. And if it is blood that is coming out of the chest wound, then the next thing you have to look for is sternal stability. If the sternum is unstable, that means that patient requires a CT scan of the chest, of the sternum, to see if the wires are still holding that chest on nicely or not, and what next can be done. Patients also complain of giddiness, headache, sweating. So if what we do is we check for pulse, we check for BP. If the BP is low, then we look for the prescription and see if there are any medicines that have been advised that can cause a low BP. Like there are beta blockers that we advise, metoprolol. They may cause a low BP in some patients. So if the heart rate is adequately controlled and blood pressure is around 90, 96, we can stop those beta blockers also for some time and follow the patient up with a BP, with some BP charting. Another scenario is if the patient can land up with a high blood pressure, hypertension. So we have to check if the patient is taking any hypertensive or not that has been prescribed to him. Many times there are defaulters. Many patients, they say that we have stopped medicine on our own. So you have to restart antihypertensive with these patients. And many times what happens is even after taking some medicines, these patients still have land up with hypertension. A specific category of patients is patients with chronic kidney disease. They have inherent hypertension. They, routinely they will come to you with hypertension, and many times you'll have to give ercamin, clonidine, or a stat dose of amlodipine 10 mg to control hypertension. Otherwise, they don't respond to all these things. And advise them a low salt diet. They may be taking a lot of salt in their diet. That is one of the reasons. Pulse can be high, it can be low, it can be irregular. All these things can cause giddiness. Many valve patients we operate on, they usually have atrial fibrillation, and we don't think that atrial fibrillation is going to get treated after surgery, after valve surgery. Atrial fibrillation stays there, but our aim is to control their heart rate. So these patients can develop a very high heart rate. Heart rate can go up to 160, 150 also. For that, we can give diltiazem. IV diltiazem can also be given. Or if the patient is not responding to diltiazem, then cordron, amiodarone infusion can also be given. So that way you can see and manage these patients. And in case a post-cardiac surgery patient comes to you in shock, I would suggest we should avoid giving a fluid challenge, because without knowing the LV function. Because if that patient is in shock, and the shock is cardiogenic shock, it is of cardiogenic entity, and it is secondary to a poor left ventricular function. If the heart function is 20-25%, the patient comes to us, we don't have any reports, and he is cold, peripheries are cold, we cannot palpate distal pulses, BP is somewhere around 80. It is better to avoid giving him fluid challenge. Rather, what we can do is we can put in a wide bore IV line and start him on some inotropes like Dobutamine. That helps a lot, because if you give volume to these patients, they may crash anytime and land up into cardiac failure. And these patients should be immediately referred to higher center. That's all I have. Thank you. Any questions? If there.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Dr. Manmohan Singh Chauhan, for presenting the talk on CABG very simplest way. It is very informative lecture for all the family physicians. Now we proceed for the question answer session. Dr. R.I. Patel, you have any question?
Yes. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Sir.
Yes, sir.
Sir, as many as how many blocked arteries can be bypassed during one surgery?
It can be n number of arteries, sir. We have bypassed 5 arteries also, we have bypassed 6 arteries also, but usually it is recommended that bypassing just the LAD, one of the OMs, or the PDA or the RCA. It gives sufficient protection from subsequent MIs. But yes, definitely, if there are 2 or 3 major OMs that are blocked in the lateral wall and you find that the vessels are good, then you can give a graft to each one of them. We can do 5 grafts also.
Right.
There's no limit to it.
Right, sir.
Right.
What is the off pump CABG?
Sir, off pump CABG means it is beating heart CABG. We are not going on bypass, we are not arresting the heart. So
Right.
heart keeps on beating. We just open the chest, we open the pericardium, we see the heart, and we make a conducive position of the heart. We prepare the heart in a certain position. It keeps on beating so that we can do our grafting on the coronary. We expose the coronary of that area. We open the coronary, put a shunt inside it, and then we start grafting. So we use an octopus immobilizer. It is the V-shaped or a U-shaped stabilizer, and it is fixed on the epicardium. And in between the limbs of the stabilizer, the artery is running. So that portion of the epicardium of the heart is stabilized. So rest of the heart keeps on beating. That portion is stabilized, and we are able to perform anastomosis on a beating heart. And as soon as our grafting is done, we just close the chest and come out. That's all.
Sir, our member are watching our webinar on live webinar on Facebook.
Yeah.
And one question from Dr. Uday Ganatra: the thyroid disease have any impact on cardiac surgery or cardiac disease?
Yeah, absolutely. A very important question, because we have a huge diabetic population, and in diabetics, many patients are hypothyroid also. So if a patient is hypothyroid, he's taking thyroxine for that, and if still the TSH levels are high, so there are very high chances that the patient, when he undergoes anesthesia, the metabolism of those anesthesia drugs is going to take a lot of time. So these patients usually take a lot of time to come out of anesthesia effect in post-op. We have to keep them on ventilator maybe for that whole night also. The next day, we give them early morning dose of eltroxin through Ryle's tube. And that is when things start mobilizing, the patients come off ventilator slowly. So the drug metabolism can get affected because of that.
Sir, can we predict acute atrial fibrillation after CABG surgery?
Acute atrial fibrillation. Atrial fibrillation is
acute AF.
Yeah, acute AF can definitely happen. What is a possibility of developing AF is the patients, if we discharge them on high diuretics. So these patients pass a lot of urine, and because of the passage of a lot of urine, lot of potassium is also lost. So if the potassium levels go down to 2.8 or 3, these patients may go into atrial fibrillation very easily. And atrial fibrillation, new onset atrial fibrillation after CABG has to be treated judiciously by giving amiodarone. And if even amiodarone does not help, then cardioversion, electric cardioversion is required under sedation.
R.I. Patel sir, आपने have you
Yes,
any
sir.
question?
Yes, sir. What are the chances of repeat surgery after CABG in future?
Sir, I think if the patient gets a Lima LAD graft and that graft is functioning well, because I have hardly seen in my career a Lima LAD getting blocked. And if the patient still has some symptoms and there is documented angina because of some blocked vessel that is supplying other part of the heart, then we can think of doing it for a redo CABG. But redo CABGs are very rare.
Right.
I've rarely seen it happen.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Actually stays well with the Lima LED graft, good flowing
You're
Lima
right.
LED graft also.
Right, sir. Right, sir. Right, sir.
Sir, how long we continue clopidogrel or other anticoagulant post coronary bypass?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Usually, our protocol is to give dual antiplatelets. That means 75 mg of clopidogrel and 150 mg of ecosprin for 1 year. At
For
least.
1 year. Okay.
After
1 year.
1 year, we reduce the dose of ecosprin to 75. So 75 mg after 1 year, 75 mg ecosprin and 75 mg clopidogrel.
Right.
And once the patient has passed another 1 year, we omit clopidogrel. We just keep the patient on just aspirin, 75
Right.
mg, with a combination of rosuvastatin or atorvastatin.
Sir, one last question. I have heard I have read in a one book that what is mini CABG technique?
Yeah, mini CABG is a upcoming technique, and usually conventional approach is through the sternotomy. We cut the sternum and then we join it again. So mid sternotomy approach is actually the safest way to do a CABG, because in CABG what we are aiming at is the longevity of life. We are not aiming at cosmesis. So this incision is definitely, it is not a very cosmetically sound incision, but with this incision, the patient stays safe, the surgery can be done fast, and we can come out of OT and reduce the surgical time by a very nice means. And the sternotomy incision is a very painless incision, I'm telling you, because what people think is that this incision is a very painful incision. हड्डी कटेगी, बहुत दर्द होगा, जुड़ेगी कब जुड़ेगी. But I would say that sternotomy incision is the most painless incision. Rather, this thoracotomy incision is a painful incision. Mini CABG, we do left thoracotomy. We go through the fourth or fifth intercostal space. We approach the heart, and if we go through that space, what after entering the chest, we open the pericardium. After opening the pericardium, the first thing we find is the left anterior descending artery. So, if we go through the midline incision, then we have to lift the heart a bit to look for LAD. But if we are going through left thoracotomy approach, the LAD is right in front of us. And with that incision itself, we can harvest the Lima and also graft it to LAD. So it is a very, very favorable approach in a patient who requires just a single graft to LAD. Rather than giving him a stent to LAD, what we can do, we can refer that patient to a surgeon who is able to do a minimal invasive surgery, and that surgeon is going to give him a Lima LAD graft through a thoracotomy incision, and that is going to stay for his lifetime.
Sir, you have vast experience in cardiac surgery.
Yeah.
You are also doing a valvular heart surgery also.
Yeah.
So, are there any reported cases of people having a tricuspid mitral valve? How would they present in the clinic, at our clinic?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Are there any reported cases of people having a tricuspid mitral valve?
Tri-leaflet mitral valve?
Tri-leaflet mitral valve.
Tri-leaflet mitral valve, I have not seen, I have not read about it. So I'll go back and read definitely. But there can be a cleft mitral leaflet, which can be confused with tri-leaflet. The anterior mitral leaflet can be a cleft leaflet.
Okay.
So there could be a division in between. So it may look like a tri-leaflet valve.
Sir, in valvular heart surgery, during a mitral valve replacement, a prosthetic of tricuspid valve was used instead of bicuspid valve.
process of tricuspid valve.
Prosthesis of tricuspid valve was used instead of bicuspid valve in
In
mitral valve surgery.
mitral valve, no.
Huh?
No,
Oh.
no. It's
Mhm.
not used. It's a bicuspid. It's always a bicuspid valve.
Yes, sir. Yes.
In aortic position, the bioprosthesis that is used is a trileaflet.
Yes,
The bioprosthetic valve. The tissue valve we use in aortic position is a trileaflet valve. But if we are using a mechanical valve in aortic position, then it is also a bileaflet valve.
Yes,
Otherwise, in mitral position, we always use a bileaflet valve, even if it is a tissue valve.
Yes, sir. Very nice, sir. A nice question answer session. And we conclude the session here. Thank you, Dr. Manmohan Singh Chauhan, sir, for spending your valuable time for us. And also thanks to moderator Dr. Ramesh I. Patel for joining with us in today's webinar. And thanks to all the members who watching our Facebook Live CME, and hope all of you have enjoyed the webinar. If any question or suggestion from you, please send me on my personal WhatsApp number. And thanks to SCG Hospital team for arranging the webinar. And thank you all. Jai Hind, Jai AFPA. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.